In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
It is 100% real. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Curious Dimension podcast. My name is Matt Barone. I want to thank everybody who has been subscribing to the YouTube channel and following the Instagram account. Those two accounts have been growing. If you have a moment, please click that like button, hit that subscribe button, and leave a comment. It really helps out the show. Today, my guest is Gary King, a prominent crop circle researcher known for his dedication to investigating and analyzing the mysterious phenomena of crop circles. He has spent decades studying crop circles meticulously, documenting their formations, patterns, and possible explanations. King is recognized for his scientific approach to the subject, employing various methodologies such as aerial photography, ground surveys, and laboratory analysis of crop samples. Throughout his career, King has published numerous papers and articles on crop circles, contributing valuable insights to the understanding of these enigmatic formations. He has also been featured in documentaries and television programs discussing his research findings and theories regarding the origin and meaning of crop circles. I had a great time talking with Gary during this podcast. I hope you guys really enjoy it. Without further ado, here's Gary King. All right, awesome. I think we're rocking and rolling here, Gary. Yeah, like I said, Gary, I really want to thank you for taking the time and chat with me today. I've got so many questions about this, and I've been reaching out to the best people I can find, the best researchers who have the most time with this, and you're certainly at the top of that list. I just wanted to give you a little background, like I chatted with you before. I've been involved and interested in the UFO phenomena for almost 20 years, and just done independent research on my own, and was aware of the crop circle phenomenon, but honestly never really paid any attention. I didn't, for whatever reason, I just didn't think there was either anything there, or I just didn't think it was significant. And then I started getting into sacred geometry, and that eventually led me to the crop formations. And wow, digging into some of the evidence and looking at this, I started to think this might be the most in our face phenomenon on the planet, and maybe the most ignored. Um, so
Yeah,
that's where I'm at. What do you think about that?
I would agree with you. I would. I mean, that's what I've thought for many years. It's the biggest story in the world, and no one's paying attention. So, and given when I first come into this, I was completely media naive to how it all worked, and and I've learnt by some very hard knocks along the way, and then actually working in journalism for a while, learnt a bit more. But yeah, I mean, I've consistently said that I think that this is the biggest story in the world. And given how I see that people react to stories now, when you talk to them about just mainstream news events, and there's this apathy that people don't want to hear things that make them have to think, or make them, or challenge them in any kind of way. So to be challenged on the level that the crop circles challenge you, I've come to learn, is it takes a special kind of dedication, really.
Yeah, it is wild that once people sort of buy into a story, and a lot of people buy into it like right away, and then they go ahead
Yeah,
and they've made their decision. And if you challenge that, the digging in of the heels is that's almost very interesting in itself. The pushback. I mean, I'm sure there has been psychological tests that have done on people, on why that is, or why that phenomena is in itself. But to me, that's almost just as interesting. It's that people don't want to.
well, yeah. I mean, I've said this is one of the other things that I've along the way, because you can only keep asking yourself the question: is it man-made? Right?
Mm.
For so long, and it will drive you nuts. So if you haven't got any other questions to ask, it's some really good, interesting
Mhm.
questions to come out of this, then you don't stay around for long. And one of those questions is, why do people react the way that they do?
Mm.
Is that phenomena B? Michael Glickman, my dear friend Michael Glickman, used to call it phenomena A and phenomena B. There's the crop circles in the fields, and then there's our
Mm,
reaction to them, and that opens up this whole, field of psychology, sociology, of culture, of religion, of all these different, areas of investigation into what it is to be human and why humans behave the way that they do,
mm.
especially in the face of something like this that's so paradigm changing.
Yeah, I recently saw a clip of, Dr. John Mack, who I'm sure you're familiar with, but he said
Yes.
something to probably gonna butcher this, but he said something to the like of, the Western mind will accept conversation about things in the spiritual, things that aren't there. But as soon as you bring something into the real that they can touch and feel, they will reject it. The mind will reject it. And that can't be any more prevalent in the crop circle formations. I mean, here you have a thing that really shouldn't be there, but then it's there, and then people can see it. It's not like it's not there, but then there's this rejection of it. So it is it is a wild it is a wild thing for someone on the outside looking in. And then I look at people like yourself who have just been in the trenches for decades, and I think, wow, what thank God we have people like this that are doing the heavy
Oh
lifting.
no, it's it's some sort of blessing and a curse, really. I think, but then aren't so many people's journeys through this time that they get on Earth. In one way or another, we get to face the dark and the light. And my particular bent for how long I've been here so far has been this for the last 27 years now with the crop circles. I'm going to say something controversial. I mean,
Yeah, do it.
I'm very interested in ufology, and I worked for Jaime Maussan as a correspondent for the crop circles for many years, and out there in Mexico in the studio. But I think people are more comfortable with UFOs and have been for many years because
Mm.
they're fuzzy lights in the sky mostly, and they're at a distance, right? But crop circles, here's the controversial bit. I'll get emails straight away. Crop circles are hardcore because they're there in the field. They're really there, and over the years, people have asked me about UFOs and stuff. I say, yeah, I'm interested, but I'm not a ufologist. I'm interested, but my gambit is crop
Mm,
circles because you can walk in them, you can measure them, you can analyze the symbols, you can talk to people who've experienced various things around them, and there are many
mm,
people who, in and around the crop circles, have experienced extremely profound things within consciousness, within reality. So yeah, for me, crop circles are the hardcore.
yeah. Awesome. Well, I wanna kinda get into a couple questions here. I know you're the guy to ask, but maybe before we get started here, maybe we can just give a little overview of what is a crop circle, crop formation. There's probably some misconceptions out there about what they are. Can you give kind of a, quick little overview? What is a crop formation or circle?
Well, they're most basic. They are a crop, which could be wheat or barley or rapeseed or flaxseed. There's been a number of formations in various different medium, mostly wheat and barley, and that they can rain. They're the crop is depressed, not crushed or flattened or broken, laid over, like brushed in some respects or weaved, and laid down into a pattern ranging from the simple and profound circle, um, and right up to massive, massive glyphs, which can contain complex mixtures of sevenfold geometry or eightfold geometry or ninefold or tenfold, um, and within them there can be contained hidden, implicit geometry, which needs to be teased out.
Mm,
Things that we've learnt from really clever people over the years. So a crop circle, in its most basic way, is some crop that's been flattened down into a
mhm,
pattern. And its most profound, I love Karen Alexander and Steve Alexander's term temporary
mhm,
temple, because for many people who have experiences in and around particular formations, and then the beauty of them themselves, the framing of them within the landscape, yeah, they're a temporary
hmm.
temple.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I first got into this, I didn't realize that like the crop circles weren't cut; they're laid down. And
Yeah,
that is such an important piece of this puzzle because for the
Yeah,
person
it
that
is.
knows nothing about this probably thinks there's somebody out there with a lawnmower mowing these things down into
Sure.
shapes. Um,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
something else I think is important is that what percentage of the time would you say the crop comes back? Like, if it's done early enough in the season, will the crop just come back or with phototropism or
Usually visitors will damage them.
Mhm.
I've got some lovely pictures. There was a pentagram several years ago, about 2017, 18, something like that. Beautiful pentagram formation. I went and flew my drone over it, visited it when it first appeared, and then a few days later. And I've seen this many, 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 many times over the years where you get this avenue of crop that's been brushed over, and it's almost like water. It waves, the lay of the crop waves and almost looks like it washes up the sides. It's quite beautiful. Um, and then you'll get visitors which will attend, and they break the crop.
Mm,
If people don't attend, then the crop, because of phototropism, the crop will rise back up. Sometimes, it can rise back up and you can hardly see that the crop circle was there. There's been faint impressions that have been photographed over the years.
mhm,
But usually people will find out about them, particularly in the middle of the summer, in the holiday season, and they'll visit and they'll walk through the middle of this avenue.
mm,
And this is where I got some great photos. We after 4 days, I've got photos of it when it first appeared, and I was one of the first in there, and it's
mhm,
undamaged. Okay. Then a few days later, say 4 days later, you go in and there's this little path of damaged crop right through the middle, dead crop that's gone white, and all the rest of the crop at the side of the avenue is still green and buoyant and flowing. And so, one of the simple but profound questions is you say, okay, so if somebody crushed all this crop down with boards, why is all that alive? And just that bit where people have walked, which I photographed that wasn't there the other day, why is that bit dead? Why isn't all the other stuff dead from being
mm.
crushed? No one wants to answer that question. They really don't.
Yeah, and that's I do wanna get into this bit of the evidence, and then after that, I wanna get into some of the maybe the overarching themes over the decades of the complexity
Sure.
of the circles. Um, but the boards on the feet, let me ask you this question. Is that is that really the only way that the man-made ones are done is with boards on the feet and, like, staking them out? Or like, if you were gonna make one, a man-made one, what's the way that it's done?
Well, that's the way that they've demonstrated it from the first announcement of Doug and Dave back in the early 90s, when they said, we'd done it all for a laugh.
Mhm,
They then presented to the world what they called a stomper board,
mhm,
and it's just a 3 foot, 1 meter sort of plank of wood that's got a rope in it that's two knots, two holes drilled in it. The rope goes through, tie a knot at the bottom of it, and you've got this rope that you can hold. And as you move forward, you stamp this board down and lift it up and stamp it down. That's
mm,
what they described. And since then, the other sort of self-confessed circle makers over the years have said this is how we do it. And when they've done some public demonstrations for television and stuff, they've done the usual. They hack some stakes out into the ground and mark out some territory, and then go around with these boards. And I've made videos and shown, where as they move across, the crop's upright, completely vertical, and they stamp it down, and it lifts itself back up again as they're dragging the board along the stems and ripping all the leaves or scraping all the crop as well. And then they stamp down again, and as they lift it up, crop that's in front and the one that they've just laid down comes back up again, sort of stays almost sticking to the bottom of the board. They scrape it as they move forward and stamp down again. And so you just see this visible damage happening, step after step after step. And usually the ones that they demonstrated with television are very, very small.
mm,
They'll be 90 feet in diameter or something like that, which does not compare to the 1,000 feet
mm,
sometimes formations that we find in the morning that we know weren't in that field the night before. Um, and when we walk in them, we film crop that's undamaged, and whenever we see them make a demonstration, they're damaged. And they always again do these demonstrations in the daylight,
mhm.
take many hours, sometimes days to complete them. So when those comparisons you see of the demonstrations and what's led the world to believe this is what makes crop circles, just guys out with boards. when put under a simple, Carl Sagan, I used to say this, Carl Sagan used to say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? Well, I've always said, I just want ordinary evidence if you want to prove that you make crop circles
Right.
with boards and rope.
Right.
I don't need extraordinary evidence. Just go out in the field in the dark without any torches and make a big 1,000-foot crop circle without damaging the crop, and I'll believe
Yeah,
you.
end of story.
End of
Everybody can
story.
go home, go to sleep at this point. That's kind of
Everybody can go home, we can watch the football, we can watch the world end with the next nuclear war, whatever it's gonna
yeah,
be, right? But for 20 or 27 years of my involvement and longer for other researchers, they've never done it because they
they
can't.
can't. Yeah, so and
No.
and one more thing I wanted to bring up about the boards, can you just go into a little bit about the canola? Because 'Cause they're covered with flowers, right? So
Absolutely, yeah.
what's the deal with
And
that?
that's one of the demonstrations. I did a show with Ancient Aliens some years ago. I think it's like episode season 8, Circles from the Sky, I think they called the
Mm,
episode. And, Giorgio Tsoukalis went out with, 3 well-known, probably John Lundberg and I forget the other guy's
mm,
name. They 3 of them went out into this field, and they were asked to copy a canola formation in canola, right? And it appeared in, I think, in 2005. It's called Golden Ball Hill. All the hills around Wiltshire have all got these wonderful
mhm.
names.
It's beautiful.
So it's a very mystical landscape that was once animated by stories. Like I think the Australian Aborigines animate their
Mm,
landscape. They name all the places. It's very much like that around there. So this formation had appeared at Golden Ball Hill. It was a kind of swirled, I think 5 or 6 fold formation that had these crescents in that swirled through. Not very big. And so that was their challenge, right? Go out in the field, make that. And they did it in 4 hours. It's the quickest I've ever seen anybody make a formation. And it's all filmed. And that's where you can see these boards scraping the stems and smashing them down. And all the leaves, all these delicate little beautiful yellow leaves all fall off. And then Charles Mallet, a researcher, went in with Giorgio,
mhm.
and they looked at the crop, and he was just picking up stem after stem after stem that's broken, and then compared that to the photograph that I think Charles had taken. I might be misquoting here. I think it was his photograph, um, when he went into the Golden Ball Hill formation in 2005, and you just see this sea of yellow flowers that are completely undamaged. And I myself have been in, I don't know how many rapeseed formations, but dozens and dozens and dozens of formations like that. And just walking down the tram line, that's what we call these lines that are made by the tractors, you get covered in pollen and yellow, you break all the leaves as you go in, and then you walk into this formation and you just see the sea of yellow without a damaged leaf. It's
And
incredible.
it's yeah, I mean, like I said, this has got to be the most in your face phenomena on the
Yeah,
planet,
yeah,
and the other thing that
yeah.
shocks me, and, I said this to Karen Alexander a couple episodes ago, it's not like this happened once or twice 10 years ago. This is happening every year, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's weird enough that it's happening, but, like, every crop season, something's gonna show up. I mean, imagine if I
Yeah.
could tell you, "Hey, just come and hang out around here for a few months, and you're gonna see a ghost inside this house. I promise you." That's almost kinda what's going on here. It's
Well, it is. I mean,
mind-boggling.
for 40 years, I think 1979. It was before that, right?
Mm,
Terry Wilson's done a fantastic book on the history of crop circles, and they've been around for a while, but not like this campaign.
mhm,
This campaign took the simple circle, and once some guys took notice of them, it started to evolve
mhm,
and present to us more and more complex challenges. When somebody predicted that it was plasma vortexes and ball lightning creating them, because the crop had been swirled in a clockwise direction, and we were in the northern hemisphere, then the following day, another circle would appear, and the crop was going the other way. Every time someone made a prediction or tried to actually control it or say what it was, it changed on you.
mm.
We learned a long time ago. Do not say you know what this is or how to predict it, but you can say that pretty consistently. No doubt about it. It's come every year in the same area. Wiltshire's the hotspot,
Mm,
and in my early days, this is something I have trouble conveying to people, right? In the early days, I was obsessed. I had to just be over in Wiltshire. I had to. It was just
mhm.
how are people not paying attention to this? This is
Mm.
crazy. And I would wake up in the morning. I'd camp over there, and I'd wake up in the morning, and I'd go to this local meeting point. It was a pub then, and someone would say to me, "Oh, there were 5 last night." And you go, "5 in one night?" "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And then the next day there'd be another 3, and it would go like that, right? And you didn't have enough time to get round them to actually, like, we didn't have drones in those days and stuff, so you had to,
Right.
go in microlights or helicopters and stuff to get the photos from above, and
Inundated.
it was crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
inundated. In one season, I think there were, like, Crop Circle Connector, the website has got, archives which show
The
the
numbers.
number of formations that somebody plotted, but I think one year there was, like, 140. We consistently had 70 and 80 and 100 formations, and
Have you been in
that's a lot of work.
have you been in 1,000 of them?
About that, yeah,
About
probably. I
1,000.
mean, I lost count, but I go back because I did tours for a number of years. I'd go back to the same
Mm.
formations, a number of times. So
I wanna get
I don't
back to
know. I've
some of the
lost count. But
complexity oops,
yeah,
sorry. Um,
go
yeah,
ahead.
so I wanted to get back to some of the complexity and some of the overarching themes over the decades, and then after that, I'd love to maybe pull a couple up and go over
Sure,
a couple if you don't mind. Um, so
sure.
so you got involved in this in the early '90s, but we
Mm,
know this had been going on before then.
mm.
Obviously, there's something going on with people paying attention to it and it evolving. What have you seen or what have been some of those overarching themes with complexity, people reacting to it, people finding new ways to kind of measure it? What are some of these themes that you've seen over the decades? Why don't we start with
Well, there's a load of themes. That is inexhaustible to talk about, because what people bring themselves to the
mm,
formations. Bert Janssen, one of the Dutch researchers, said something brilliant years ago, and I've kept it ever since. By I have to give him credit.
mm,
He said that when people come to him and present their ideas about crop circles, it often tells me more about them than it does about the formations. It really does. They're in a way, they're kind of mirrors to what's going on inside somebody with what they project onto it,
mm.
which is really interesting.
Yes.
That these things do that because it gets very Jungian then in terms of symbols
Yes.
and our unconscious mind and so on. Um, So, and then you've got people who say, for example, the UFO researchers, they want proof. To me, I got disheartened with the UFO research community early on because they sort of came across to me in those early days like psychics who were always talking about having a good contact from
Mm,
spirit and they talked of it in terms of giving good evidence, right?
mhm,
Because they talked about something that was actually true, or they got something right when they were making a prophecy or whatever it was for somebody.
mhm,
They talked about it in terms of good evidence. And you're like, why is it you're always looking for evidence?
mhm,
Um, so there's people who bring that to the table, and then you ultimately you find out what you're interested in, like what grabs you.
mhm,
And so what grabbed me early on was I met a man called John Martineau,
mhm,
who had visited the crop circles when, in the early days, and he'd found some really, and I knew nothing about geometry, honestly, and I was very blessed to have a guy who took me to the crop circles become my teacher, and he handed me this book that John had written called The Harmony of the Spheres.
mhm,
And he told me then that John had written a bigger book and that there was more of this work out there, but sort of teased me with
mm,
it. Then I met John. Um, And John had found this tangential geometry that you get 3 circles, for example, in a sort of triangle, 1 at the top and 2 at the bottom. And when he put these lines through the gaps in the middle, he found that they were really perfectly tangential to each other. That's interesting. Somebody sort of laid that out in that way. And then he started to find this implicit and hidden fivefold geometry and eightfold geometry inside
mm,
formations, particularly one at Upton Scudamore in the early 80s. Um, and he's found that there were these whole number proportions that were being used in them, which for lovers of music, they'll
mm,
know that the way a musical scale is tuned is using these whole number ratios. And then, that opens the door to knowledge of the masons, the stonemasons who built the Gothic churches, who used these whole number proportions to, build the churches and the Gothic buildings. And then you go back to ancient Freemasonry, and you find that geometry, right back to Plato and Socrates, is something that's been used as a tool for cosmology and self understanding and truth, pursuit of truth. You know,
Mhm.
I always talk about a circle. If you put a triangle inside a circle, and then a circle inside that triangle, Michael always used to say this. That's Euclid's second theorem. The central circle will be exactly half the size of the outer circle,
Ah, if you're describing.
and that's what Plato.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's what Plato called an ever
Mm.
truth, because it's always been true. It doesn't matter how big the circle is, as long as you've got one circle that's being um, containing, sorry, the
Mhm.
triangle, and then one circle that's being contained by the triangle, it will always be 2 to 1. And that's an octave. And that's the top string of a guitar. If you halve it, pluck it, you'll hear the octave. So then when I found out they built the churches like that, I thought, oh, this is fantastic. You know, I was in Freemasonry. I used to be a lawyer back in my
Mhm.
other life, and I was a Freemason for 9 years. And so I was always intrigued why we went to the lodge and talked about the grand geometrician of the universe, and that we were initiated onto the square and all of this sort of stuff. I never really knew what it meant. I just went along for the
Mm.
meetings. And then all of this was being explained to me. So this is a very long way of me saying what I followed, and that's and I've said all of this because I don't want to exclude all the other things that people have found.
Mhm.
Like Lucy Pringle's found some great stuff with Parkinson's sufferers and some of the research that she's done. And
Who was that?
Lucy
Oh, I gotta
Pringle,
write that down. Louis who? Oh,
Lucy,
Lucy.
Lucy, Lucy Pringle. Yeah, she's a veteran researcher. I hope she won't mind me calling that. She's been around from the early days.
Wow.
And she's done some great research. Yeah, you'll find her online. She photographed the crop circles for many years, and her area of research went into Parkinson's sufferers who she found had their symptoms alleviated by entering crop circles. So she got a bunch of scientists involved and started doing blood tests and thyroid tests and all these kinds of things to see if there was any difference to them physiologically prior to going into a crop circle, what was happening inside it and what happened after.
I gotta look
So
at
she's
that.
done some good work. Look, yeah. So there's do you see what I mean? There's lots and lots and lots of strings to the bow of crop circles, and I really don't want to limit them to the pursuit that I followed, which I took an
Mhm.
interest in, which is what Michael Glickman took an interest in, what John Martineau, what Karen Alexander took an interest in, which was this geometry, because it's a language, and a language is a way that we communicate, and so if there's some form of communication going on here, which obviously we believe there is. And it's not using an alphabet to just say, stop fighting each other, you idiots, which it does say sometimes.
Could I stop you there for
Then
one
there's a
second?
communication.
You said it
Mm,
doesn't use an alphabet, yet we know that gematria is a way that ascribes number to letters, and we have
it
found that in
does.
some of the
Yeah, yeah.
formations. Is that correct?
But it's done that in a roundabout way.
Yeah.
So you know about the Crooked Soli
Yeah, I
formation.
wanted to bring that up at the end, but yeah, let's go right now, yeah.
Cool. Okay. So for that, you bring some pictures up at some point.
Can you see that one?
Not yet. Yeah, that's it. That's Crooked Soli.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
So this formation. Oh my God, this formation.
Wild.
So what you're seeing there, and let's start from the center, right? You got so those two tractor lines that you see in it. Can you see four lines,
Correct,
two at the
yes.
bottom, two at the top inside the central circle? Okay. Those are what we call tram lines, and they are 25 meters or 75 feet apart. Okay.
Mm.
So that gives you a scale of that central circle of standing wheat.
Oh god.
All right.
Uh-huh.
And there is an untouched center. There is no center point. So you cannot walk into wheat and not make it lay down and flatten it.
Mhm.
So that circle has been created without putting the compass on the page,
Mhm.
which is pretty difficult, especially over that scale. And then we move on to the outer spiral that you can see there, which is it's a spiraled
Mm.
helix, which is a mitochondrial DNA, which you only find in the female. Okay, it's only in passed from the mother down to the daughter,
Mhm.
and we get it, but we don't pass it on. They do.
Mhm.
So theoretically, mitochondrial DNA goes all the way back to the primordial Eve through the female line. Okay, because it passes down. It's come from the beginning, right?
Mhm.
But it's circular. Where's the beginning and where's the end? That's the conundrum of a circle. But let's not go and dive into those deep waters. Now, if you look at that spiral, you'll see it's made up of lots of little squares.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the squares, if you completely filled it in and made a band of those little squares and completely made a circular
Mm-hmm.
band, filling in all the gaps in the centers and all the edges, you would have 1,296 little squares.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got to get my numbers right here. 504 of them have been flattened in order to leave 792 of those squares standing up.
Yeah.
Okay? 792 and 504.
Mm-hmm.
So 792 is the diameter of planet Earth. 7,920 miles is the diameter.
In miles.
In miles.
In miles.
English miles,
Yes.
yes. Very important. And the mile is 2 steps. A mil, 1,000 steps
Mm-hmm.
is a mile. All right? 5,040 English miles is the combined radius of the Earth and the Moon
Mm-hmm.
together. It's half the Moon, half the diameter of the Moon, half the diameter of the Earth combined, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's bringing in the celestial heavens into this number. It's a heavenly number. Okay. 1,296, the sum total of those two numbers, is 6 times 6 times 6 times 6.
Mm-hmm.
If now in the early alphabets, when we first started writing, and writing's a very important subject for us to consider because for thousands of years, we passed down accumulated knowledge through stories to each other.
Mm.
We didn't write things down. So memory was a very important quality of the human experience. And we understood that the way to enhance the way that we can remember things is to put them to song, to remember them, to have a tune going along with them, and to tell a story that has twists and turns and ups and downs and a drama to it, because we're wired for being told stories.
Mm-hmm.
We're wired for story, human beings. So when we when we first started to create symbols that represent the sounds that we make, we created an alphabet, and it was the Greeks and the Hebrew alphabet that came first. And as you quite rightly said, that has something called gematria, which means that every symbol of the alphabet has a number ascribed to it.
Mm.
They didn't lose sight of the fact that the fabric of the universe, the mysterious fabric of the universe, is this thing we call number.
Mm.
There's number, we think we invented number, but number was already here before we got here. We just discovered it and then gave it some symbols. And so they didn't lose sight of the fact that in order to have perfect communication, they built all these buildings around them that were in line with the proportions of the Earth, these ratios and proportions of music that we talked about. And so they created an alphabet that had a numerical component. And so if you write a word and you want to know the value of that word, the letters would be ascribed a value, and you add those letters up, and you get a total, you get a number. And so there's lots and lots and lots. If people want to look into this, it's a fascinating subject because I'm sure you have. And so when you look into it, you see all these you see all these things come out of all these numbers. You know that you think it's mind blowing. That's incredible how that
utterly mind blowing.
It's mind blowing. Absolutely. And so 12,960, which is the sum total of 7,920 and 5,040, is 6 times 6 times 6 times 6, which, when translated in gematria, spells out the goddess of all creation.
Gosh.
Okay, and so Wiltshire, the area, the hotspot, the hub of the crop circles is in a place called Alton Barnes, right? And it has these two hills, Milk Hill and Knapp Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And Knapp Hill is the pregnant belly of the goddess, that you can still take a photo from an angle and see the umbilical cord going down into what is called East Field, the field of wheat.
Wow.
And then on the other side, Milk Hill has these two breasts. And so the body of the goddess lies across the landscape.
God.
And so these were people that worship the goddess, the eternal feminine aspect, as this creative force that drives us forward, not the masculine aspect so much as us. And this crop circle, woven into a field of wheat, containing all of those numbers and containing a mitochondrial DNA that actually makes us think of the primordial Eve,
Mhm.
is telling us specifically the goddess of all creation.
I mean,
Isn't that
that's
fantastic?
insane. I mean, that's unbelievably beautiful, mind-blowing, and I don't I mean, it's like, what do you say to that? And like I said
Exactly. It's a showstopper. It's a showstopper. And you know, ever since it came, I think it was 2002. That's 22 years old. That crop
yes.
circle. And there's very few people you can say that to. And what do you
Yeah.
say? What do you say
Yeah,
to
they would
that?
have no idea. Full disclosure, I just finished reading Crooked Solly, by John Michel and Alan Brown. It's a thin
Oh,
book, but for anybody that's at
yeah.
all interested in all and wants to have your mind blown about this particular formation, I can't recommend that book enough. It's,
It's the
yeah,
best. It's the best.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, that's an amazing one here. Yeah, Crooked Solly, my god, I mean, the connections to the area of Crooked Solly, one of the other things that John Michel did, I think he wrote about it in several books. It was in Crooked Solly, it was also in Dimensions of Paradise, is the connection between squaring the circle with the Earth
Mm,
circle, and then inscribing that in a square, and then circumscribing a circle around that. Can you
many of
explain to
them.
people real quick just what is squaring of the circle, and how often do you see that in formations?
Um, it's difficult to do quickly, and I
Take your
over the
time.
years, every time I'm asked this question, right, I challenge myself to try and make it as accessible as possible.
Mhm,
Um, as it took me a long time to understand. On the one hand, it's very simple. On the other hand, it's very deep and profound. And I suppose that speaks to the two sides of us, right? The way we look at the world, the way we are, the way we're made up. Right? We've got these two hemispheres in our brain, which are completely different and see the world differently.
mhm,
And we kind of either lean to looking at the world through one side of that hemisphere or one of the other, or a mixture of the two. And that that sort of makes up a great deal about how we interpret and perceive the world around us. Um, The circle is so profound because it's this notion of the straight line of the diameter, which is one side of a square, and 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 the times I've said this to people who were just told at school, right? Pi is just pi, right? Don't question it, just accept it, right? It's 3.14, it's 22/7. Don't ask me what, it just is, all right? That's what I was told at school. And no one ever said to me, and I don't know if I'd have got it then, even if they had, but no one ever said it's a relationship. It's a relationship between that straight line and that circle, that circumference on the outside. It's a relationship. It's how one is to the other. I, it's that simple, right? And so if you take 3 to 1, if it was 3 times exactly that circle, that circumference was exactly 3 times that diameter, then you go, oh, it's 3 to 1,
mm,
right? When it doesn't go in exactly 3 to 1, you think, oh, it's recurring, but it's not recurring because the numbers don't recur,
mhm,
which then talks to us about infinity.
mm,
So then we're talking about a relationship between something which is finite and something which is infinite. So you can jump from that to, we have a finite life. Do we have an infinite soul?
mhm,
These are the existential questions of life, right?
correct.
The circle, the simple humble circle, has that symbology contained within it, just in what I've just described, right?
Mhm,
Relationship between a finite life and an infinite soul. So, um, the circle of the sky that the ancients watched the planets go around in, and counted how long it took for a planet to move over space in time, numbering space and time, which is astronomy, um, was considered the heavens. The circle was the heavens, circular, that you watched go around. And they saw the circle of the moon in the sky, and so circles were around us. Um, and so heaven became the symbol for a circle. The circle became a symbol for a heaven, sorry. And the square is a very practical, rational number. It speaks to this other side of us, which is very logical. And so squares are very practical here on Earth, right? We have square windows, we have square paving stones in square tiles. They fit together very nicely. They're very rational, they're very practical. If you had circular windows or circular paving stones, you get gaps in between them. They're not functional,
Mm.
right? It's much more difficult to make calculations if you're building houses and they're circular, as opposed to mass building square houses and square cars and square windows and so on. So squares are fourfold, and we have four directions. Many countries have four seasons. We find that the circle is of our year
Mm.
is cut into four, which implies the square working with a circle.
Mhm.
And so I don't know how it developed, but the squaring of the circle became known as this symbol then, which was said to unite heaven and earth together,
Mhm.
which is then jumping into kind of quasi-religious terms, isn't
Yeah.
it, right? Uniting heaven and earth, right? Heaven comes to earth and mankind lives in peace forever and all this sort of stuff, right?
Mhm.
And so the practical aspect of making a square that has a perimeter uh, equal to a square that has a perimeter equal to the circumference of a circle, when you measure them, they're the same, is actually impossible. But you can get really, 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 really close.
Mhm.
And so geometer philosophers over the years, dating way back, tried for some reason to find a solution to physically making a square, drawing a construction, only using a straight edge, no measurements, straight edge, a compass, and a pencil, starting from the dot, starting from the point, which when you've got a blank sheet of paper and you put that point down, you're then starting with that infinitesimal point that we're told the universe began from. This suspicious package that exploded and unfolded material reality, right?
Mhm.
We don't know where the energy came from to make this big explosion and how material matter, the right chemical brew, and all the material elements we find on the periodic scale, how they came into being, and then combined with other atoms to make molecules and so on. But it did, and it started with this point. So that when you put when the philosopher geometer puts the point of the compass down onto the paper, he's then got this point which is infinitesimal. It doesn't have any width or breadth or height, no dimensions. But when he unfolds the compass, he then has a line, 2 points, 1 dimension.
Mhm.
And that 1 dimension unfolds as you draw a circle. You create an inside space and an outside space. And so they tried from that very humble beginning to create a diagram which would then eventually square a circle, make it equal either in perimeter or in
Mhm.
area, the surface areas. There were 2 solutions that were sought after to square the circle. And so for many, many years, all these very, 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 very smart people tried to do this. And in the end, well, I say the end, but I think it was in the 1800s, the Academy of France banned people from trying to square the circle because they said it led to madness.
Well,
Right?
I mean, that's ridiculous, but, I mean, you could
I know, but they did. You can look it up, right? They actually said to their academics, "No more squaring the circle. It's because it's the road to madness."
wow, they must have had people just spending their
They s
whole life trying to do this and just losing their minds trying to
Yeah,
get there.
yeah.
Oh my god.
And so, one of the things that go about that though is that you can look back at how close they got to finding a solution.
Mm.
Where were all their failed attempts at creating the right conditions or right diagrams to square a circle.
Right.
Um, and then when you so then we move forward to the crop circles. So the crop circles started to one of the big sort of iconic formations that we see is what we call a quintuplet. It's where you get a circle in the center which we call the mother
Mm.
circle, and then these 4 daughter circles on the outside, which are always smaller and they're always separated from the mother circle. And they sort of like those 4 small circles are like in a square, and this central circle here in the center. Um, and that's where John Martineau first found um, the fivefold and eightfold geometry.
Mhm.
And then these quintuplets would appear over the years, right from the beginning, from the early 80s, in different ways, with sometimes with rings around them, sometimes with rings running through them, different iterations of it, and slightly different expressions of it, but the same theme, and they still continue to this day. And then in 1999, I think my dates get vague now. One appeared where the mother circle in the center had expanded into the daughter circles. It was actually in within them,
Oh my god.
and that had never happened before. And Michael Glickman stared at it for ages, and then thought he would measure that circle. He drew a square from the center points of the four daughter circles and made a square, and then he measured the perimeter of that square against the circle that was running into it, and they were equal. They were accurate to the thickness of the pencil line.
To the thickness of the pencil line.
To the thickness of the pencil line.
I mean,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
come
how
on.
accurate they were.
What
Yeah, so straight away, then, right, you're dealing with an intellectual profile, and this is Alan. I'm quoting Alan Brown now, or paraphrasing Alan Brown when he first said this. He says, "My hairs still stand up on end," when he was talking about the crooked sole. My hairs still stand up on end when I think about it. But when he talked about the square and the circle, because what that happened then as a result of Michael discovering that is that Alan Brown then went back over 25 years of the quintuplets and found that he had 100 new solutions to back engineering squared circles in different ways, using a pentagram, fivefold.
Mhm.
Fivefold geometry acted as the mediator between the heavenly circle and the earthly square. 5 is the symbol for man. That's the Vitruvian man
yeah.
that Leonardo da Vinci drew, that, in the square inside the circle with the man. This is man mediating between heaven and earth, right?
Wow.
And so what we'd had then, just think about this, right? We're told that people go out and make these crop circles just to fool the public, blah, blah, blah. No one on earth would have the ego to be able to make crop circles that had just 5 simple circles to offer a solution that was so simple. This is going back to Alan Brown's. I moved away from what Alan Brown, I was going to quote Alan Brown then. Alan Brown said, to find a solution that's so simple, right? Just using 5 dots and to come up with the most difficult puzzle that's been pursued by man, to have such a simple way of doing it, has to demonstrate high intelligence.
Mhm.
To make something simple that everybody can understand,
Mhm.
that's actually really, really complicated, that by using complicated approaches, other people couldn't solve it, means that we're dealing with high intelligence.
Right.
And that and on hearing those words, that's what you're dealing with. So the intellectual profile through the roof, because it's just made something so simple. And then you go, so he's dangled this in front of us for 25 years and waited for us to discover it without saying a word.
Yeah.
If you'd solved the problems that Plato and Socrates, or not Socrates, but Plato and Archimedes and Aristotle and all the way up to the French academics that were banned from doing it, if you solved the problem and then you were weaving it in wheat in 5 dots in the middle of a field, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Wouldn't
absurd.
you want the credit?
Yeah.
Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and that goes back to the evidence. I mean, like, you'll have a giant crop circle to show up and nobody's claiming credit for it. Human beings are not like that. I tell you what, if I'm out there all night long and I'm building a 1,000-foot crop circle, I am posting that all over social media. Everyone's gonna know about it. And so that just goes back to the evidence, I'm sure. Um,
It does.
yeah.
It does.
Uh,
But we're into other realms of evidence then, because on the one hand we talk about, you can't damage crop. You can't make a flattened crop without
yeah.
damaging it. Very simple. And then you talk about these mathematical solutions, these geometrical solutions to puzzles that we've had presented to us for thousands of years, solved, dangled under our nose for 25 years. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, right, we've got 100 new solutions now to back engineer. I could teach my children this stuff when they were 8 and they get it.
Right.
It's that good.
It's incredible. Yeah, the geometry of this stuff is what sucked me in, and then the mystery kinda got me sucked in, and then, all of it just sort of bewitched me as Karen Alexander said in her article. It's, I really liked what she said, you could go as far into this as you want, as comfortable as you want, but they're
Yeah.
there, and, they don't seem like they're going away. It seems like it's kind of reflective. The more we pay attention to it, maybe the more it kind of evolves. Um, I mean, would you
Yeah.
say it's kind of like a teacher maybe? Just put
No
no
question.
question.
No question. It knows for those of us, see, that's when you start to realm, like you start to leave a gap between your own experience and then what other people are sort of what they're wrestling with the
Uh-huh.
formations. So you can start to sound a bit wacky, but Karen and Michael and I, and many of us, we would have conversations about the fact that because it gets very personal. When you listen to Karen's um, vlog, The Call, which I know you have, um, we you if you go out on the branch gets thinner, right? As you get out on the end, it gets much more wobbly. So those of us that have gone out on the branch and like held on while it's waggling around have had some strange stuff happen to us, right? That indicates when you ground yourself and sort of think about it, indicates that whatever it is that's creating the crop circles, whatever it is that's behind this thing, knows you better than you know yourself,
Mm.
and that's very
And
interesting.
also unsettling for probably many people.
Yeah, but for a lot of people,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, Karen, see, one of the things I love about Karen's work. Well, I listened to Karen talk early on in my research days, and she came up with this. She was a therapist, a psychotherapist, yeah. So she'd worked with people who've got issues like we all have, all right. And one of the functions of seeing a good therapist is that therapist is going to ask you to lay your cards on the table,
Mm.
to put down where you've been and where you are now and where you want to go, right?
Mhm.
And so when you've got all your cards on the table and you can see what's happened, that person, that therapist then should know you better than you know yourself because you're hiding yourself from yourself.
Mm.
Whereas you're now trusting someone to see you where you can't see yourself,
Right.
right? So then the crop circle, they're not just teachers then, they're kind of therapists, right? Because they're working with us
Mm.
individually, knowing our own little quirks of fears of where we need to be pushed to open up, maybe become more whole.
Mhm.
And so these things seem to do things to help us along that path if you choose to
Interesting.
if you
Interesting.
choose to accept it. Yeah.
Yeah. Gary, I want to respect your time, but there is something I really want to get into with you. And I know you've spoken about Oliver's Castle before, that particular formation.
Mm,
Can we talk about that for a second? And before we do that, maybe I can show a quick little 10-second clip of that formation just so people know what we're talking
sure.
about. I would really appreciate that because this one has boggled my mind. So we're just going to show a quick little video here. Let me know when you can see it, Gary, and I'll hit the play button.
I will.
And, this is Oliver
Okay.
Castle,
I can
1996, is that right? Yeah,
6.
okay,
Yeah,
and, we'll
96,
tell
the
the
year
story.
before. That's Oliver's Castle from a distance there. It's beautiful,
Okay,
by the
let's see
way.
if we can.
There you go.
So, that's what I wanted to show, the Oliver's Castle footage, and then I'm just gonna go ahead, if you don't mind, I'm gonna put up the actual formation here afterwards, so we can look at that and talk about that for a second. I think it's
Sure.
right. Oliver's Castle, where are you here? Nope, where did you go? Oliver's Castle, there we go. I think this is it. Is this the one? Let me know when you can see this.
Yeah,
Okay.
I got
So
it.
that's what showed up after that morning, that apparently that video. So, do you
Yeah,
mind telling that story again? I know you've done it before, but I would love to hear it.
sure. I mean, I wasn't involved, so because I didn't get involved in the crop circles until the year after. So everything I'm telling you is stuff that I've heard from people that were there at the time. And then, stuff that came out from their investigations along the way subsequent to the formation appearing. So it's not first-hand experience from
Okay.
me. Um, so first of all, let's start with looking at the scale of the crop circle,
Mm,
okay? And pointing out that everybody accepts that it was not in that field the day before and was there at first light the following morning,
got it.
okay?
Yep,
And that's not in dispute.
got it.
So going on what we said earlier, looking at those tractor lines, and counting that they're 75 feet in between each little double
Yep,
ones that you see there, those 2 lines. So then we're looking at 150, 300 feet, about 350 feet
across.
in diameter,
God,
okay, roughly.
Not
Yeah.
small.
So it's not a small formation, and it's sixfold. You see there are 6 arms coming out of that central circle, and then there are 2 little circles on the end of each of those arms, one slightly smaller than the other. And they're connected by avenues coming out from the center.
Mm.
Okay, so the video that you saw was filmed by a man called John Whaley, who was a 19-year-old kid who went out for a night watch, as lots of people have done over the years to try and catch crop circles being made or whatever.
Mm.
Every people gave testimony that the night before he was going around asking people if they wanted to join him, and he ended up going up there himself. The story goes that he heard noises from his tent. It had been raining, and he heard noises, sort of like, I think, high-pitched tones or stuff like that. Came out and saw that these balls of light flying around. Now, people said, and I don't know this is true, but people said that the original video was actually a lot longer than what you just saw on there, that he was filming these balls of light flying around for quite some time, and that he actually didn't really even notice that the crop circle had gone down until he subsequently saw the video,
So he's
because
videoing
he
the
was
balls
too
of
busy
light
watching these
going
lights.
around. He sees these balls of light. He's like,
He was
"That's
just videoing
amazing."
these balls of
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. That's how the story went. And so, the meeting place of crop circle researchers was a place called the Barge Inn. It was a pub, uh, that everybody sort of, met up at and shared information about crop circles. So that opened about 10 or 10:30 in the morning, and he was there scratching at the door, waiting to grab hold of the first researcher he could get his hands on to show that video to. And they put it on the TV screen, and Polly Carson, the farmer of Eastfield, and the farmer's wife of Eastfield, and Francine Blake, and some other people were there, apparently. I can't remember what the names of all the people that were there, but I've spoken to several along the way. And they watched this thing. And first of all, they watched it through the viewfinder, and then they put it on the TV, I'm told.
Mhm.
And there it was. There's these balls of light flying around, and the crop circle falls down, right? So a man called Peter Sorensen talked John Whaley into giving him the original video, and that's where most of it got lost, allegedly, and only that little bit, that 15 seconds that you see, remains.
Mhm.
But that short clip, which has obviously been the subject of huge
I can
controversy,
imagine.
um, that short clip has become, this iconic thing with regards to the crop circles. So the story on one side goes that John Whaley was a fraud, and that he concocted the whole thing, had the crop circle made, that he left Oliver's Castle very early in the morning, drove to Bristol, which is a city west of that location, Oliver's Castle. Would have taken him about an hour, let's say, to get to Wiltshire, to Bristol. Had some animators knock it all up for him in the studio, and then was back in Wiltshire an hour or so further away in Alton Barnes. So it would have been an hour and 15 minutes, let's say, 2.5 hour, let's say 2.25 2.5 hour round trip for him to get to Bristol and back again. And he got back to the Barge Inn at 10 o'clock in the morning to show the video, all ready and all done and complete, with crop circle in the field that wasn't there the day before, right?
Mhm.
And that's the story that's been pretty much accepted by most people, right? That it was all faked, and it was just a couple of animators who did it in Bristol, knocked it up for him, and fooled the world, right? Um, some other people have analysed that videotape. Studio in London, I watched a detailed analysis from some people in a laboratory in London. There's also been some American experts that were consulted. I wrote some documentaries for Gaia TV some years ago, and they're in Spanish, but that we presented quite a lot of these people that made the analysis of these tapes on those shows. And here's what's interesting. It was 1996 handheld camcorder, right? Not big technology back in 1996 with camcorders, right? They didn't have Steadicam and all that sort of stuff. So you can see the horizon on the footage going up and down, up and down. It's moving constantly.
Mhm.
But the balls of light stay at exactly the same height as they fly across the field and the formation goes down.
Mhm.
So there are 25 frames a second in that footage. So in order to have those balls of light stay at exactly the right height, someone would have needed to animate them onto every single frame perfectly and
Oh
meticulously.
God.
And there's more than one light.
Yep.
The whole duration of that clip, which would explain why some of the footage got conveniently lost, because if you had 15 minutes of that footage with them doing that and this thing going up and down,
Right.
it'd be really difficult to say that some people animated it, right?
Right.
But if you got 15, 10 seconds, it's easier to convince people that it's just a quick clip that's been faked,
Mm.
right? Um, because the guy who took the footage, he's the guy that came out years later and said, "Oh, I made the formations. Yeah, I'm a professional crop circle maker and all that."
John Whaley said
The
that.
guy couldn't even walk. No, no, no. Peter Sorensen, the man who took the
Oh,
video footage and then
oh.
conveniently
And
lost it.
wasn't he was kind of a shady character that was hanging around the south of England for a while?
Yeah, yeah, he's just this American that seemed to have money to turn up at the crop circles every summer and have a plane so they could fly around and take photographs. And he did something which I think was actually quite sneaky. I used to get quite mad with him because he used to name them. So a crop circle would appear and he'd call it the clutch plate or the clown, right? And as soon as you give something nomenclature, you name it, it sticks in people's minds, right? It diminishes it. It diminishes the whole power of it because you've just called it a clutch plate or a clown.
Right.
And he would be the guy that would give them names. And so, I remember having it out with him in the barge one day and saying, "Look, I wish you wouldn't effing name these things, right? Because,
Right.
you're just limiting this whole thing and for people to investigate." Anyway, that's my
Right,
thing.
sure. Yeah.
Um, so, so you've got this footage that's going up and down. You've got these balls of light which maintain perfect accuracy, and there's no artifacts. See, in those days, animation would have been painting onto the thing digitally. You'd have had to put them on, and
Mm.
I don't know how you'd have gone about it in 1996, but it's a lot more difficult than it is now. You can do it on a laptop now, no problem.
Yeah.
The technology exists. But then no. In 2004, a Norwegian filmmaker called Terry Toftness made a really great documentary called Crossovers from Another Dimension about crop circles. And he, at that time, consulted some Disney animators. And he said to them, "Can you fake this for me? Can you make this for me with all your stuff that you use for your animations?" And they gave him an estimate and said, "It'll be a couple of weeks and a good expert would be able to tell."
Mhm. In 2004.
That's in
Yeah.
2004. That's 8 years later.
Mhm.
So, now there are a lot of details I'm sure I'm missing out of
Mm.
this. I know my colleague Andy Thomas,
Okay.
he's another man you should get on your show.
Andy Thomas?
He Andy Thomas, yeah.
Okay.
Uh, he's been around. He's written several books on crop circles. He's just recently published a book called The New Heretics. He runs the Glastonbury Symposium. It's a conference that does crop circles and, alternative media and so on. He's very knowledgeable about crop circles. He's an elder to me,
Mhm.
you know. He was around before me, and he's got a lot more information about this particular subject with these videos than I have because he was on the scene, he was around,
Mhm.
so he can fill in gaps that I'm missing here.
Mhm. Let me ask a question about this. So it's a fact that the Oliver's Castle formation was not there the night before. Um,
Yeah,
and so that alone to me just speaks volumes. But I guess the only kind of
yeah,
hole in the story is that, I guess the official story is he ran to Bristol, he had the thing made and came back. But I guess the only hole in the story would be that maybe he came to Oliver's Castle with that video already made. Um, and then he
yeah,
shows up, but that
yeah.
still doesn't explain how the formation shows up overnight. He's not doing that by himself in the
No,
dark, right?
no, no. I mean, as I say, it's a big formation. Whoever did it, would have had to do it in the dark. We know it wasn't there,
Mhm,
um the night before. Oliver's Castle is a lot of people go walking up there.
mhm,
It's a great place to watch sunsets. People walk their dogs up
mhm,
there. That escarpment of Oliver's Castle that looks down on that
mhm.
field. There's no way. There's no way you would walk around there and miss a crop
Right.
circle. No way,
And
especially one of that size.
one more thing I wanted to talk about, there are companies you can hire to make crop circles, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of the better ones that are out there, like the ones that actually do logos for companies and things like that.
Yeah,
Um, I
yeah,
mean, but when they get commissioned to create someone, first of all, they have to have permission from a field owner, a farmer, correct? They can't just go do this.
yeah, absolutely,
And so, and then
absolutely. So
go ahead.
the best example of that for me is the Ashai beer
Yes, I've seen
commercial. Have you
that
seen
one.
that one?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was $1 million. Cost $1 million
That's the other thing, the
bucks.
cost.
Yeah, yeah, cost $1 million bucks, right? So it was they had 40 professionals, 40 guys, right? Land engineers. They used this technology called Mazescape.
Mm.
It's a UK company that can project you give them an
Uh-huh.
image and somehow they can upload it to a satellite and they can project some coordinates onto a field and then you can walk around with some equipment and it buzzes or whatever and then you whack your stake in
Uh-huh.
there and mark out your area and then you can design your maze on the
Right.
floor, right? It's for making mazes.
But then you're still using boards, right, on
So
the
they
feet? Is that how they're doing it?
no, they weren't. They were using tractors to cut the
Oh, so
crop.
they're chopping it.
You can watch the footage. They were chopping it. They had weed whackers, the guys that were doing the small Japanese symbols because they just basically created the beer label. It was
Ah,
750 feet by 300 feet or something. And they used weed whackers to cut out the small little bits, the Japanese letters. And for the big areas, they had a tractor with drum rollers on the back, just packing the wheat out.
right.
So from above, from right up in the air, it looks like a crop circle. But you get down there, and it's not a crop circle because it's cut,
Right.
right? So you had 40 guys. They had drones. They had all these workers. They had ground workers. They had surveyors.
In daylight.
I think they used something like.
In the
Hmm?
daylight. They're not doing it at night.
Oh yeah, they work from 7 a.m. in the morning, sunrise to
Yeah.
sunset for 7
For
days.
7 days.
40 guys.
Oh my god.
7 days,
Mhm.
right? And they've got interviews. They've got interviews. Kate, there's a woman called Kate, I've forgotten her name, Kate something, journalist from Australia who just did this brilliant piece. And she's going, hang on, guys. They use 48, 400, I can't remember how many. They used an enormous amount of pink spray paint, right, to mark stuff out. So when you went in there, you can see all this pink paint everywhere
Mm,
amongst all the cut crop. They used hundreds of stakes and staked this thing out. There was holes everywhere where they'd whacked them into the ground. It was on a completely flat piece of
mm.
ground, which is another very important subtle factor to crop circles.
Undulating ground.
Most crop circles are on undulating ground. They're not on flat ground, which makes the whole design much, much more difficult to make it look like it's on flat ground from above. Ask any surveyor. So there's interviews with the guys who were behind the construction of that thing, and they said that, I think the main guy said when he turned up and looked at the field and knew what he had to do, he just said it was daunting. We were daunted.
Mm.
He said, and all these funny scenes would emerge where you'd have someone in one of the Japanese letters, and it's relative. There's no complex geometry. They were just copying a beer
Yeah, it's a
label.
logo.
They're not solving geometric puzzles, right? They're copying beer labels. And they'd say, like, you've got some guy who's in the Japanese letter and he needs to go to the bathroom, right? Or it's time for lunch, right? But he can't get out of it without damaging the crop. So he's got to retrace his steps and
It's not yeah.
all these logistical aspects of what it takes to make something on planet Earth,
Mhm.
right? Michael Glickman always used to say, as an architect, he's a professor of architecture, he always used to say, no building project ever, ever, ever comes in on time or comes in on budget.
Mm,
They always go over budget and they always go over on time.
mhm,
And it's true.
mm.
But crop circles
Nope.
don't. We go to bed and there's nothing in the field and we wake up and we only get 5 or 6 hours of darkness here in the British summertime. It's light again at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's dark at 11 o'clock at night. 5 or 6 hours, that's it. And in that time, in absolute darkness, because there's no lights in these farms at night, it's dark.
Mhm.
In that time, these huge formations appear. And then you don't see the trace of anybody, having gone in, come out.
Amazing. Gary,
No,
I wanna respect your time and really thank you for doing this.
a
Like I
pleasure.
said, I'm kinda new to this, but I've been interested in the other phenomena that's been getting a lot of press in the last few years, and, but to me, like I told you in the beginning of this conversation, to me, this is the most in your face and ignored phenomena on the planet, and, yeah, I wanna learn more, and I hope people get interested in this because it is a beautiful, amazing phenomena that happens every year.
Every year, every year. I worked as a tour guide to fund my research for many years, from like 2008 until probably the last tour I did was like 2019. I did a week's tour or something. No, I did a couple of years ago. I took some Italian friends around, but I don't do it anymore. But
Yeah.
that was one of the ways I used to fund my summers so that I could go around the crop circles, just to take people on tours and tell them about
Yeah.
stuff. And um,
Amazing.
and people would turn up. it used to amaze me because people would turn up thinking it's like Disneyland, right? That there's going to
Right.
they'd message me and say like, can we guarantee that we'll get round 5 crop circles while we're there? And like,
That's not how it works. Yeah, it's not like you're
that's the
not ringing
ghost
them
in
up.
the haunted house, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're
Yeah,
not ringing
I
them
can
up.
tell you that they're going to appear at some point, but I don't know when.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Gary, thank you
Oh, I
so
hope you get
much.
over here sometime, Matt. And,
Yeah, yeah.
you
I'm
get
just
over
gonna
here
hit the
sometime.
hit the
And
record button. Do you mind hanging out for just a couple minutes? Just want to ask you a couple questions off
sure,
camera.
sure.
All right, cool. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank
cool.
you. Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.